Graded potentials versus action potentials. The first thing we got to talk about are graded potentials. Now, graded potentials, I did the thing with the lights, didn't I?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So the deal is, in order to get a neuron to send a signal, you have to generate a graded potential that's strong enough to start an action potential. Graded potentials happen on this end of the neuron, dendrites and soma. Action potentials happen on the axon. The thing about graded potential is, if you only have a real small stimulus, you're only going to get a little bit of this membrane depolarized, and that's not enough to get the first part of the axon depolarized. So graded potentials are called graded because they vary in size. You can have a little graded potential, or a bigger graded potential, or a really big graded potential, depending on how strong the stimulus is. Does that make sense? Yeah.
In the book, it says something that graded potentials depend on chemically gated.
Chemically gated or mechanically gated channels. And that's why I had you on the quiz tell me this is where they were. The chemically gated and mechanically gated channels are on this end of the neuron.
Okay. So there's no voltage at all.
Voltage gated start at the beginning of the axon. And that's why I had you learn that. Well, what happens is once you get the first voltage gated channel open, then it's like dominoes, the rest of them open. And that's why action potentials affect large areas, because they involve voltage gated channels. But you've got to have a graded potential that's strong enough to open that first voltage gated channel. Does that make sense?
Does the voltage gated go all the way down to the axon terminals, or does it?
Voltage gated goes basically all the way down to the synaptic terminals. So these are the axon terminals, or the telodendron, right? And then at the end of those are the synaptic terminals. So they're basically all the way down to the very end of this. What's going on with the graded potential? There are three phases of the graded potential. The first phase is the cell is minding its own business. It's resting. It's at its resting membrane potential. You took a little meter and you stuck it, one little probe on the inside, one little probe on the outside. It would read about minus 70 millivolts. Now, we're going to talk from the point of chemically gated channels, but realize the same thing could happen with mechanically gated channels. It's just that the chemicals are more common. Mechanically gated channels are found, and we'll get to this a little bit later, like on your sensory neurons, like particularly in your skin, you've got the pressure neurons, you've got deep pressure and light pressure and itching and pain. The pressure, the tactile, the touch receptors tend to involve mechanically gated channels. Okay? But they work the same way. It's just a mechanical stimulus as opposed to a chemical stimulus. Okay? All right. Resting, we have chemically gated channels. The sodium channels are closed. In fact, remember, most of your gated channels are closed. In fact, they're all pretty much closed at resting membrane potential. So, sodium channels down here, chemically regulated sodium, or chemically gated. One textbook uses regulated, sorry. Regulated, gated, same thing. I didn't catch that when I updated my notes. Now, some stimulus, some event, causes chemicals to be released that open those sodium gated, or those chemically gated sodium channels. Blood. Now, we know that we have more sodium ions on the inside or the outside?
Outside.
Outside. So if you open a sodium channel, what's going to happen? Sodium's going to rush in, exactly. Now, initially the inside of this was at minus 70, right? If you've got a bunch of positives running in, what's going to happen to the membrane potential? Yeah, exactly, both. It's going to depolarize. It's going to become more positive because you've got positives running in. Make sense? And so the membrane is going to depolarize. Now, it's only going to depolarize right there. right where the sodium, right where that, if we open one sodium channel, sodium's gonna rush in through that hole, and you're only gonna get depolarization over a small area. Right? Okay. So sodium rushes in, runs around on both sides of where it came in, and that's a little bit of a local current. That's what the movement of the ions is referred to as a current. And wires, the movement of the electrons is the current. But remember, we don't have electrons bouncing around by themselves. They would mess things up. Now, if you remove the chemical that opened this channel, then the channel's going to do what? Close, right? Now, however, now I've got a bunch of sodium on the inside. My membrane is depolarized, at least right there, right? So how do I get it back? Exactly. Sodium-potassium pump pumps the sodium back out, and that repolarizes the membrane. So you remove the stimulus, sodium channels close, the sodium-potassium pump catches up. Remember, it's been working the whole time. It's just if the sodium channels are open, it can't keep up. Once they close, it catches up. Pumps the sodium back out, the membrane repolarizes. Remember that I'm going to have sodium channels all over this. I'm going to have them on the dendrites, all over the place, right? If I have one chemical and one channel opens, I'm going to get a little bit of sodium in. In other words, if I have a small stimulus, it's going to cause a little bit of depolarization. But if I have a strong stimulus, if I release a whole bunch of this particular chemical, whatever chemical causes these channels to open, okay, then that means I'm going to have a lot of these channels open, and I'm going to have a lot of sodium running in. Right? And so that's what we mean by the potential of this potential is graded, because it changes size. How much depolarization is produced based on how strong the stimulus is. You have little ones, you have medium ones, you have big ones. And so the more sodium I've got running in, the more likely I'm going to get this whole membrane up here to depolarize to the point where this will depolarize. Okay? And that's what this is. The greater the more sodium that runs in, the greater the degree of polarization, and the further that current can spread. If this sodium channel opened and sodium rushes in right there, then I might have, let's see, it started at minus 70, right? So I might go from minus 70 to plus 20. But out here, I might only go to plus 10. And out here, I might be 0. And so the further you get away, the smaller the effect. That's what that's saying. Okay. And so that's why we say graded potentials vary with size, but they can only affect a limited portion of the membrane. And so you have to have enough of those, enough sodium running in enough places to get depolarization over here at the beginning of the axon. Make sense? So we kind of got the idea of graded potentials, right? Okay. All right. So how do you get a graded potential? How do you get an actual potential from a graded potential? How do you get from a can't read? Okay. You have to get a graded potential strong enough to get the initial segment of the axon to depolarize to something called threshold. And usually that's about minus 60 millivolts. Resting membrane potential is usually about minus 70. Okay. So you've got to get this initial segment to get to about minus 60. That's threshold. Because if you can get it to minus 60, then the voltage-gated channels open. And once the first one opens, then it depolarizes, and the next one opens, and it depolarizes. And that's why once you get the first voltage-gated channel open, the rest of them open like dominoes. So threshold is how much depolarization you have to produce to basically generate the action potential, to open the first voltage-gated channel. For example, I can have a neuron here, And I can have a neuron that synapses with it right here. Or I could have another neuron that synapses with it right there. Or I could have a bazillion neurons synapsing all over the place. Some of them opening sodium channels, some of them opening potassium channels. Ooh, we're gonna get there. Remember how we said that the central nervous system does information processing? This is what happens. This postsynaptic neuron processes all of the signals from these presynaptic neurons. And it's basically, if those signals depolarize enough, it sends the message.